And people generally are motivated more by what they lose than by what they can gain. And if everyone started running in one direction and we hadn't seen the lion coming, then if we didn't follow the crowd, then we'd end up getting eaten. So we've learnt as people that we generally kind of follow what crowds are doing.
And you use the word fear, and as a lawyer, sort of focusing on those sort of things could be seen as manipulative.
Hi, I'm Dan Connors, one of the co-founders of the Applied Influence Group.
Hi there, my name's Natalie Salunke. I'm the Head of Legal for Europe and Australasia at FleetCor. A lot of organisations see lawyers as business prevention officers. What advice do you have from your experience that you can give to people to overcome that entrenched view of lawyers?
So I think when people think about you in that way, they're focusing on what they're losing when you provide advice. So you're saying someone can't do something, or they can't do it in the time frame that you're focused on. And people generally are motivated more by what they lose than by what they can gain. So when you're explaining why they need to do something, you're focusing on the positives, that they need to do this for that reason, whereas they're focusing on their losses. And I think you can reframe how you're saying things to focus on what the other person will be losing if they don't take your advice. So if they don't get the contract right first time, you're going to have to keep going back to them, and that's going to cost them a lot of time, and they're going to lose that precious resource that we all have. If they get something wrong and it destroys the relationship with the client, they're going to lose potential business in the future. So by reframing what you're doing as avoiding those losses for those individuals, I think that's how you can significantly reframe that view that they have on people.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think a lot of lawyers would probably try to justify why they should be there and what they've got to gain, or what the business has got to gain from the positives that a lawyer can bring. But actually what you're saying is there's much more value in focusing on what the other person could lose.
So I think people feel it much more. So yes, it will resonate more by focusing that individual on their potential losses if they don't take the advice that your team or you are providing to them.
I think a lot of lawyers would probably feel like they're coming across as defensive, or the other side could see them as defensive if they're trying to justify themselves.
So I think sometimes what we can fall into is reverting almost to how we felt when we were children. So when we've been told that we've done something wrong, we fall back on behaviour that we had as a child, which is often that kind of justifying why we did something or why someone needs to do something. And that can reinforce the kind of parental attitude that the other person has, which is where they're telling you how you have to behave, why you should do something in a certain way. So I think when you're reframing that as the losses, you're staying very much in the adult stage, you're providing them with data, you're being really clear on what they're potentially going to lose out on if they don't do it. And by focusing on that, you don't have that defensive, almost, it can come across sometimes as childlike response to someone challenging you on something.
Yeah, and I think, automatically in the title Business Prevention Officer, it's already showing an entrenched view of what somebody thinks of you, right? So you're naturally probably going to be on the defence anyway.
Yeah, and particularly over time, if that's the constant viewpoint that people are getting, that again can kind of reinforce that mindset within the in-house person that they are on the defensive and that everyone's out to get them. And by focusing it in that other way, by reframing the message about everything that they're going to miss out on if they don't take your advice, you're almost going on the attack again and retaking the initiative rather than purely kind of we have to do it because of this and taking that defensive posture.
So in a world where there is increased lack of trust from the public in relation to companies and more regulation, my view would be that there's no better time than ever for lawyers to be really selling what they do to their companies and that narrative. What advice do you have to lawyers to get that message across to the organisations and people that they work with?
So I think that often when people in a business are doing the kind of behaviour that might represent a problem for the organisation, maybe it's that they're going after a quick sale so that they get their bonus, and that might cause a long-term problem for the client. What the legal function is there to do is to protect the organisations that you work for from. And one way that you can do that is really to highlight the threats that the individual is facing if they don't take your advice. So if they do go for the quick sale that might get them the bonus, that might damage the long-term relationship with the client, and therefore they're going to miss out on loads of value that they can bring in and that the organisation will benefit from. And I think one really good way of doing that is using something called social proof. So social proof's an evolutionary feature of humans, and it comes from when we lived on the plains of Africa, and if everyone started running in one direction and we hadn't seen the lion coming, then if we didn't follow the crowd, then we'd end up getting eaten. So we've learnt as people that we generally kind of follow what crowds are doing and what other people are doing. And if you can find examples of where good behaviour and things that you're suggesting has led to really positive outcomes, or alternatively, you can find examples of where someone's ignored the advice from the in-house team and it's had really bad consequences, that can really reinforce that message to that individual and make you really relevant.
And you use the word fear and focusing on somebody's fears. I think the worry as a lawyer, sort of focusing on those sort of things, could be seen as manipulative. What are your views on that? Or how to get comfortable with that?
So I think often if you're increasing a fear that's not genuine, that's not there, that's kind of a trick. And that's really what we'd see as being one of the key differences between influence and manipulation. So if I were to trick you into being scared of something that you weren't, and you were to find out, you'd feel tricked, and that wouldn't be right. But if there's something you genuinely should be concerned about and you're just not really aware of it, or it's just not enough in your eye line, then it's really in that person's interests to make them aware of that threat, because it's something that they probably should be scared of. So that would probably be the main difference in that example that we'd be talking about.
So it's almost an educational exercise or a highlighting of unknowns that perhaps that person wouldn't have been aware of.
Absolutely, and framing it in a way that makes it really personal to them and aligns with maybe their personal agendas, but bringing in the business objectives and the wider things that you're trying to achieve.
So once a lawyer has their seat at the table, what tips do you have for them to maintain that seat?
So I think that sometimes when people talk about the table, they're talking about it almost as if it's its own organism, and maybe they forget that all it is a group of individuals. So I think one of the best ways that you can really keep yourself relevant and keep yourself at that table is really being conscious of all the individual components at that level. And everyone will have their own personal agenda that will align in some way or other with the business objectives. So someone might be approaching retirement and they just want a nice, easy life, or calm, they want everything to stay the same. And you can then tune your message and make that relevant. Someone else may be really keen for promotion and really driven, and therefore the message that you give to that individual might be slightly different. So working out when you're providing your advice, how that relates to those individual agendas can be really key. And then probably the second aspect of that would be that that group of individuals is likely to be fairly dynamic and to change. Some people will leave an organisation, might be promoted or move on. Other people will come in. And when that does change, that can be really disruptive. It can change what people are scared of. People might feel someone else is a threat to them or threat to their promotion. So that can really, really change that dynamic. So remaining conscious of how that dynamic's changing, and therefore what that means for how you're aligning your messages, will keep you relevant and keep you relevant to the individuals and not just this amorphous organism.
Focusing on the individuals around you, from your answer you didn't really sort of focus on the individual as such, as the person in that situation. Are there any sort of more introspective tips that you can give to somebody? I guess from what you said, there's preparation involved in knowing the people around you, which is key, but also being able to read the room in real time and adapting to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's our observation that people in business are generally so busy that they don't spend enough time preparing, particularly for key meetings, and that's widespread across all sectors. And we think being prepared is a time saver. It makes you more effective. It means you can get things done in one meeting that might take you 4 or 5 if you haven't invested that time. And we'd always ask ourselves a series of questions before we went into an important interaction. And probably the most relevant one here is thinking about what some of the outcomes might be from some of the topics that you know are going to be considered or discussed, and ask yourself, what do I think is likely to happen, and how will those individuals respond? What might go wrong, so how might someone respond in a really negative way, and am I prepared for my messaging for that, and how am I going to respond to that? But the key one that we really see with people missing is being prepared for if things go much better than expected. And people then often end up missing opportunities to exploit a situation that they weren't expecting. So really being prepared for things going better allows you to exploit those opportunities, makes you really relevant, might allow you to progress in other issues or other areas that you didn't necessarily think might come up.
So I was once given the advice that in order to maintain a seat at the table, you should always ensure that you contribute or have something to say in meetings. What are your views on that, considering what you said earlier?
So we think being really focused on the messages that you're trying to deliver is really important, and it's really important that people get those messages. And I think if you feel the need to always talk about all topics, you run the risk of diluting those messages, and therefore that can get lost in lots of other things, and can also come across as being inauthentic and not really credible. And therefore my advice would be focus on what your message is and make sure that you deliver that at the time that it's right.